Welcome, data enthusiasts. I'm Joseph from Zuma, and this is our podcast, Data for Good. Here at Zuma, we're a dedicated recruitment agency for senior data insights and analytics professionals, connecting you with Berlin's most influential and innovative companies. Today, we're joined by Chase Richards. Chase is team lead for product analytics in the payments product area of Zalando in Berlin. Chase, how's it going today?
It's going well, Joseph. Thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thank you for asking.
Super, of course.
Today, I understand an area that's really in your passion. You'd like to talk about the state of product analytics, how we are, where we are, how we can drive improvements in this area, and ultimately take product analytics from good to great. Am I on the right path?
Absolutely. I'm here for it.
Super, super. Before we get into that, let's wind back the years, roll back the years. I'd first like to know, how did you first discover the power of data analytics, and how has that understanding of data and product analytics evolved for you over the years?
So rewind to 2013. I was living in Philadelphia. I was close to completing a PhD in modern European history. So I was going to become a professor. That was the plan. But for anybody who knows about the state of the academic job market, definitely in the US, but also in Western Europe, where I'm somewhat familiar with it, they would probably know that academic jobs are very hard to come by. This is the result of many decades now of insufficient funding for education. But once the financial crisis came in 2008, that really sort of sealed the deal. And today it's very, very difficult for someone to find a permanent position in the humanities or social sciences, especially, which is where I was coming from. And rather than just sort of play the lottery for years and years and really give up any hope I might have of having a decent choice of where I might live, I decided to do something else. And I knew that I wanted to continue to work in a field that was highly analytical. As a historian, I was very comfortable with the idea of being thrown into a lot of information. Back then, for me, it was the archive, and having to make sense out of that information. But I think really for anybody in the humanities, social sciences, this experience of being a kind of intermediary between information in general and people who need to make sense of that. Anybody with that experience, I think data, it really, there's a strong analogy there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I knew that I wanted to work analytically and have better career prospects than I would have in academia. And just anecdotally, already at Penn in Philly, where I was doing my PhD, I had heard about, so-and-so went to work at Google, and they were doing German studies before, and now they're at Google. And I went, wow, pretty crazy, huh? That was about as informed as I was at that point. I didn't know the specifics of analytics, probably hazy on data in general at that point, but I knew that tech might be a plan B if it wasn't going to work out with academia. And so I was fortunate enough to get a postdoctoral research fellowship once I completed my PhD. And that gave me a few years to continue to advance academically, but also to reflect on what this plan B might become. And so I finally took the plunge in early 2015, once a couple more academic hiring seasons had come and gone. Like, I had ticked off all the boxes. I got a dissertation prize. Like, I'm not trying to brag, but I'm just saying, like, this is how bad it was, and how bad it still continues to be. You can do everything and more in academia and really not get the kind of role you're looking for or in the place you're looking for. And so in early 2015, I decided to start doing internships. I was in Berlin doing research, German history, natural fit. I decided to start doing internships at startups. And did I really know what I was getting into? Not really. Another thing at that point was that it was still the case in early 2015 that really, if you worked with data and you weren't doing machine learning in Berlin, people still called that business intelligence. They weren't really saying analytics as much at that point, let alone product analytics. It was just kind of a catch-all category. And so, as fate would have it, my first internship was at a kind of neighborhood social network here in Berlin. And I see now that what I was doing was product analytics. I was looking at user behavior as expressed in data, the data that we had, and helping the founders of that company and my colleagues make better sense of things and see how we could better serve our users. And one internship then led to another. In 2016, I had my first full-time role in analytics. Yeah, I guess that was over 6 years ago now. And really, I've been very fortunate. Germans say vitamin B, Beziehung relationship. If you know people, if you can get referrals, it makes this journey a lot easier. But I just found that in my case, there was really, it's exactly what I had hoped. It's that there can be analogies in the kinds of work we do in a previous career, analogies with the sort of work we might do in another career. And I've learned that it's important not to be super literal about the skills that we have, because for one thing, a lot of skills are transferable. And for another, I think these analogies exist, like what I was saying about, as a historian, archive, messy information, make sense of it. There are very, very strong analogies there with what an analyst does. And so that's really been a kind of guiding light for me. I won't say that if it had turned out that I had no mathematical aptitude, if it had turned out that I can't code at all, of course, this wouldn't have worked. I'm not going to say that everybody is just infinitely flexible, but I think really looking for those analogies when it comes time maybe to find a different line of work, that can be the most helpful thing, and not, again, to get bogged down in checklists of skill or tools.
Very interesting background and non-linear for where you've ended up. Not to say that you will end up here. I am seeing in the Berlin market and internationally, humanities does feature quite a lot in data professionals' backgrounds, which is really good. Is really, really good to see. We understand from humanities, it's about the way, how humans think, what we've analyzed and collected in the past, why we behave the way we do, what makes people tick, and all that stuff, all those motivational aspects of the human experience, they all contribute hugely to analytics, generally speaking. I don't want to take it down the path of humanities versus sciences in terms of whether people should be discouraged down an educational path, but it would be good to know from your perspective the relationship, technically maybe, between humanities and product analytics. How do they relate? Can you how do they relate from a practical perspective?
Yeah, good question. Well, certainly in data science, machine learning, that side of the data world, there are tons of folks coming from STEM backgrounds, masters, PhDs, all over the place. I would say humanities and social sciences, I'm encountering it more frequently now. Certainly on the social sciences side, a lot of analysts have studied economics, for example, coming from finance and MBA, professional degrees, stuff like that. I think besides the sort of general analogy I mentioned of making sense of information, I think for humanities and social sciences, there's just there's a fundamental curiosity there. Not the curiosity wouldn't apply to STEM, for example, but this idea that there is something like a human experience that can't always be captured in formulas, let's say. I think that kind of curiosity, for me, for example, and this is going to be super specific, but my dissertation had to do with how people interact with texts and how that may eventually have a certain political impact in terms of access to texts.
Your dissertation in
German history.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Interesting.
So this idea that there are practices that in themselves don't have any inherent political charge, that may then have a political impact. I think through cultural history and political history, and I think this way of looking at the way people interact with an app is very reminiscent for me, and having that kind of curiosity and devoting that kind of attention to the question of how somebody swipes, for example. It sounds like this neutral thing, but depending on what your product is supposed to do and what infelicities making a certain change to swiping may have in the user experience, to me, again, that really reminds me of this sort of question I had as an academic in the humanities and social sciences is, how do the practices that we have and that we develop have an impact on culture and on politics? And I think it's easy to sort of to wax kind of disparaging about, oh, it's just an app, da, 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 da. But I mean, these are people's lives we're talking about. Like I'm on my phone way too much. I think we all are, but it would be silly to claim that these things are insignificant. The way that people interact with an app to I don't know, to make their lives better, to get stuff done. And so this kind of curiosity, I think, can really, that we do find often in STEM certainly, but for me, how I know it from the humanities and social sciences, I think that curiosity, bringing it to analytics and thinking about the people behind the data can be really helpful and healthy.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. When you think about social sciences, I think about demographics and different groups of people that will use different apps and how those groups differ in the use of the app. The TikTok generation, for example, would interact and have a very different experience and understanding of how apps should be compared to maybe someone that looks at an insurance app at a very simple level. And maybe that is a simple example, but it is an example of understanding the human experience and how humans interact with technology.
Absolutely. Demography is hugely important. And the importance of generation in historical scholarship, for example, it's all over the place. And it's just a shame that this sort of data on age can be quite difficult to come by sometimes. But for sure, like it's all about, for me, just thinking about, who is our customer, who's our user.
Yeah. So when you think about your work within the payments domain of Zalando in terms of product analytics, can you think of how your humanities background impacts and influences that?
I think just in my work in product analytics in general, wherever I've been, it's really about, certainly whether it's when I was an individual contributor or working with my team to make sure that our work has a certain texture and impact. I think it really is this about thinking behind the data, about thinking of data as, expressing something approximate about the reality, but not really necessarily being the reality. And data really should be functioning for us as evidence, as signal, and just because they don't perfectly reflect, the real state of things behind how somebody is using the app, for example, doesn't mean they can't be actionable. And maybe that sounds sort of abstract, but I think it is a very real dimension by which I'm trying to bring that spirit of humanistic or social sciences inquiry into the work. And this isn't like a flag that I'm flying, and I'm not trying to be an advocate for the humanities or social sciences generally in a professional context. I mean, this is a big exception, an important one, but in my daily work, it's just, I try to sort of provide a guiding hand here. And for me, that really is inspired by my background, but I think it's something that we can translate into more everyday terms. I will also say that just the importance of communication, of clear communication, of communicating not just clearly, but efficiently. That's something in the humanities that was really drilled into me. And something as kind of banal as how do I write a paper that is effective, that doesn't lose the audience? Going through your writing and reading things out loud. I mean, maybe this is the best advice I'll give to anybody watching or listening to this today. Like just things like when you're trying to see whether something you've written is going to make sense and get across and be understandable, read it out loud to yourself. This is great advice I got in grad school. But just zooming back out, clear and efficient communication, thinking about your audience when you try to convey something, really paying attention to the words you use, the terminology, the concepts. These things make a difference. It's not just aesthetics. I think this is also something I picked up from my education, at least.
Interesting. We do have an advice question at the end. Perhaps that will feature strongly in your advice. But before we get to that, you mentioned about individual contribution and those days way back when. You're now a team leader. When you think about teams and the work that you do, what are your observations about the differences between what makes a team and a product analytics team successful compared to a team that's unsuccessful? What are the differences there?
I think very broadly, a kind of North Star for a successful product analytics team would be knowing the problem that you need to solve, that you want and need to solve, hopefully both. I think especially working with data, it's so easy to get distracted. There are so many rabbit holes to go down, let alone just the sheer difficulty of interpreting the data sometimes. I think you really need to know who cares? Like what's the importance for the business? What is the problem we want to solve? What's the point of using all these fancy methods? And I think a really successful product analytics team in particular, where you have this strong hybridity with the product manager role, you're kind of wearing both hats, you're working intensively with product managers. Product development really is, I believe, and of course I'm not the only one, about solving customer problems. I think a successful product analytics team will have these things in mind and really see the fancy techniques as a means to an end, really work closely with product managers, with engineers, with designers. I think I don't want to create like this exaggerated cliche, but I think analytics teams can sometimes fall into the trap of being too isolated. You have silos. It's kind of like the analyst up in the tower, like, just drop your request into the bucket, you bring the bucket up, you drop your answer down. We all live by Jira tickets and never talk to anyone. This would be the extreme example, but I think a successful product analytics team will be, if not directly embedded in the product organization, will at least have forums and rituals and processes that really make face-to-face encounters, whether that's in a virtual meeting or in person, really make this a part of everyday work. Like product analysts need to be in the thick of things. They need to know the strategy. They need to know the problem that's being solved, because product analysts also work with the expectation that they'll be super proactive, right? But it's not a fair expectation if you don't have a structure that fosters that productivity and makes product analysts be as effective as it can.
Those processes and systems that you speak of, are they also so that the stakeholders that they work with get used to how we work together? There's a benchmark, a framework that we can follow to work together to create this communicative dynamic.
Absolutely. And I think it doesn't, especially to start with, it doesn't need to be fancy. Just even making sure there's like a weekly jour fixe where everybody comes together and goes through the Jira tickets, reviews prioritization, discusses new topics, gives updates, goes over the strategy. I mean, it can just, like, the first step is just getting people together. Beyond that, yes, having coordinated issue tracking systems, having standard templating, having a chat channel, a mailing list, these things also help. But like the first thing I think really is the FaceTime. I found working with product managers sometimes, as much fun as it is, sometimes product managers, they have like these async chat channels with the engineering manager, they're talking to each other, and these things, this communication kind of gets isolated, and you're sitting there as the PA and you've learned that the strategy changed. Well, why didn't I hear about that? And I think sometimes just having like a weekly meeting, it's the first step, but it's the big one. And you really need to keep everybody in contact with each other. And I think out of that kind of ritual grows habit, and out of that habit grows greater sensitivity to just involving PAs in general in the discussion.
And maybe those sideline conversations that product managers are having, were they to have them including the PAs, the product analysts, those product analysts would not only hear and listen and think a little bit differently, but they might be able to contribute better. Does that still exist though, that that unpreferred method of working?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not. I think if we talk about something still existing, I mean, I'm not saying that there's some kind of. It's not that I sometimes see there's this kind of archaic style of. I don't even know what archaic would be in tech, I guess.
Yeah, something
but
4
I mean,
years
maybe
old.
kind of this like enterprise style of you have your role, I have mine. Just let me know what you need and I'll get back to you. I don't know. I haven't worked in enterprise, but I'm trying to think of where this mentality might come from. I think the issue is really we just kind of, reorgs happen all the time at different kinds of company. People come in with different habits from different companies, and it can just be easy for product managers and engineers especially to just kind of, okay, what are you building? When's it going to be done? What are the updates? What do you need for requirements? And these discussions, granted, to sit there in a meeting as a PA, that's really like, if you just add the PA to this existing format, the PA is going to sit there for 55 out of 60 minutes and sometimes, and just not really have a lot to contribute, or even just to soak up all the minutiae of something in very granular detail is not always the best use of a PA's time. I think it's good to really have the meeting that is macro enough for everybody to get the context they need, to get the frame that they need for all the issues in common between PM, PA, designer, and engineer to come to the surface. And then you have different meetings with different cadences between different players for the more granular issues that are relevant between the different combinations. You know what I mean? And I think often it's like these granular channels exist between all the different roles, and you just don't have that higher level forum where people can come together to discuss the common issues, which should be hopefully solving a problem.
I wonder, as you talk about the kind of integration of people on topic, is the topic of data mesh, is that something that's in your on your landscape at the moment with Zalando and product analytics?
I mean, this topic has come up with regard to like our data infrastructure. But really, as product analysts, we are more than customers of data engineers. So it's not a topic that we will like discuss frequently. Certainly not with product managers, but I mean, it would belong to, I would say, a larger stable of issues or considerations that we have when it comes to ensuring that we have a data infrastructure that allows us to do our work. But I think maybe the more broader issue of relevance here is that I don't think it's necessary for stakeholders to understand all the ins and outs of the data infrastructure, all the internal stuff that your team is doing to work more effectively to deliver solutions for them. But I mean, it's a topic that's come up, and I've been hearing more about data mesh lately, but it's not high prioritized right now, I'd say.
Yeah, just curious. We speak to a lot of people on the data science and the data engineering domain, and it's a hot topic for them as they try to not try to, they immerse themselves within all areas of business and data, and setting up the platforms and systems for them to do so. So that's why I ask. Chase, given your, and I'll stay away from the political or even social comparisons, but given your extensive experience and upbringing in the States, and even working in some of the most innovative areas in the US, have you noticed any differences in the way the approaches to product analytics across Berlin and West Coast US, or the US generally?
For sure, yeah. And so I did, after making the switch into tech in Berlin, I did go back to the US and work there for a few years in California. I think before I answer, I think it's important to acknowledge that, I mean, everything is historical, and all of these different sort of the complexion of every major tech city worldwide, especially when it comes to something as particular as product analytics, which product analytics certainly is. The complexion is always different, and it's like everything is kind of a little bit, the ecosystems are connected, but everything is kind of its own ecosystem. And if we think of the development of tech in general in the US, I mean, there's a history there. There was a context, a foundation. You had the aerospace industry. You had just the explosion of computer-based technologies, especially in California, due to that aerospace background, military industrial complex, all of that. You had the talent in place there. You had the money in place. And of course, even today, California and the US in general, there is so much money there, and there is an ecosystem of talent that's built up over the years. And it would be unfair to expect of any other city, just because it's cool, or even if it just has money, to sort of have a similar development, because it's not just money, it's not just talent, it's not even just both of these things, it's so many things coming together to form an ecosystem. And if you think of product analytics, I would argue, whatever your opinion on Facebook, is that Facebook really kind of invented product analytics in the way that we practice it today. Like, use data, see what gets your users engaged to your product, see what gets them to keep coming back. I mean, that's the blueprint. And Facebook was originally, in California, of course, many places now, but an ecosystem develops there around that, especially for product analytics. And that kind of shapes these different metropolitan areas as centers of tech, of data, and product analytics in particular. And so the list of cities worldwide where you really have a concentration of product analysts, it's quite short. And again, that's part of this development of ecosystems. It's the San Francisco Bay Area, it's New York, it's London, it's Berlin, Amsterdam, Paris, to me sounds less familiar. And so that is my contextual answer. I would say what I've noticed in Berlin, which of course historically we have to remember was not a wealthy city, super dynamic in creative terms, but really didn't have that huge accumulation of capital to work with in the way that like California did, for example. But certainly creativity in spades. I think what I found here is that it takes more work to convince stakeholders of, even just from like a cost benefits perspective, of the value of data. It's not so much that people are disinclined to accept the usefulness of data, but when it comes to, and again, I've worked at multiple companies in Berlin, this is like a summary. When it comes to making the long-term investment on infrastructure, on reporting tools, on personnel, it can take some more convincing, because data can be intangible. And especially, I would say in Germany, especially when like the enterprise background is more prominent in tech here, I would say, whereas, in California, for example, the sort of mix is a lot more sort of startup based, like fast moving tech companies that are growing. I would say maybe part of this reason here of why you have to work more to make the sale, is people coming more from those enterprise backgrounds. Like the mix, I think, is a little more enterprise leaning in Germany. That's one thing I noticed as well. Even in Berlin, even if you go to a startup here,
their understanding of product is much more conventional, whereas in the States, this, very, very fast moving innovation environment, they're happy to change and happy for everything to be original and different, and they have no expectations as to how product and product analytics should be done.
I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say no expectations. I would say it just the culture is different here. And yes, I think product analytics really thrives when the product is fast moving, when you're iterating quickly, and when we're really willing to make that investment in infrastructure and personnel. I would say it has not at all been the issue that I found that really anymore, that in Germany that people are really skeptical of the data. Maybe sometimes, I mean, it can be good to be skeptical of the data, but certainly not skeptical of the worth of data. It's just like, okay, so if we really believe in the data and in the importance of, of democratizing access to data, for example, it's going to cost some money probably. And maybe we should think about a contract with a different provider, a different tool. And so I think taking that step that's definitely, bringing your decision maker, the person with the purse strings, along with you. That can be a different experience in Germany, I would say. And it's a cultural difference. And that interacts with this whole ecosystem history that I mentioned to just create like a particular context here. But again, like Berlin is on this short list of cities that I mentioned. It really is a center of product analytics, and product analytics is weird. It's very particular. It's something you really need. Generally, it's something associated with like B2C tech, where you have that massive data. You have really these large customer problems to solve. Like Berlin is on that short list, and so I don't want this to sound negative. It's just the context is different, but it's on this list. Like Berlin is a center of product analytics, and I think to me, that's a good sign.
Fantastic sign. Fantastic sign for us as recruiters as well. Knowing that the people that we are working with are at the forefront of innovation. With that, actually, what would you perceive generally or specifically to be the future of product analytics? What direction are we going in?
I think this hybridity of the role, namely that product analysts, they kind of need to wear both hats, like the product manager's hat and the data practitioner's hat. I think that hybridity will only increase. I think, especially the more that automation and, speaking of data mesh, like really intelligent like data platform solutions, I think the more that advancements in these areas take a lot of the manual work out of working with data, I think the more this PM side of being a PA will shine forth, because hopefully we'll have more time to sort of hunker down with the problem itself. If we're spending less time struggling with the data, if we don't have to ask the data engineer, like, what does this table mean? If we're not like taking way too much time to build a dashboard because the tool is outdated. I think the more capacity we as PAs have for the less manual work, I think the more that product manager dimension, the product thinking, the strategy will come to the fore. And I think really, getting back to this question of like, what is a product analytics team? How would we know success? I mean, measure success, but even just knowing it, like walking into a room, and if it's filled with product managers and product analysts, I've used this kind of this metaphor before. If you or this scene before, if you walk into a room, PMs, PAs, it should be a little hard in the first few minutes if they're talking about product development to tell who's the PA and who's the PM. Like I really think, you're there to do the same thing. to solve the customer problem, and really working backwards from that. And I think this is an extreme case, but ideally I would think like only when you follow the people back to the computers and see like, do they have a SQL terminal open? I mean, that could be a PM, but are they going there and working through a query or doing a dashboard? Then you know who they really are. But when they're in that room talking about the problems to solve together, going through the metrics, defining metrics, like these are all things that PMs and PA should be able to do together. And I think if a PA, if you're not interested in like thinking backwards from the customer problem, thinking in terms of strategy, if that's not interesting to you, if it's just about playing with the data, then I think there are other roles that might be better suited. I think it really is about the data, the tools, the techniques. It's all cool, but it's all a means to an end. And PMs, PAs, designers, engineers, we're all there to solve the same product development problem together.
Thinking about the customer, relating it to the customer and the user, it also speaks to your humanities background.
Yeah.
Yeah, what shapes us and the ideas that we make. And before you mentioned Facebook and how they're somewhat of a template or a benchmark, a benchmark for other businesses globally to follow. In some way, yeah, of course, in some ways, we don't need to speak about the ills, but I understand they also have product experience analytics teams.
Yes, based on my understanding, the last time I looked into this, I think product experience analysts were working with ad performance, whereas the data scientists and analytics, which is what Facebook calls their product analysts, or called the product analysts that weren't working in ad performance, they call them data scientists and analytics. And there's like one other case of naming differences. But a few years ago, I was discussing this with somebody and was told that, but it may have changed in the meantime.
Sure. I only mentioned that in relation to the question about the evolution of product analytics, and you've said about how product analysts and product managers need to start or should be thinking similarly and appreciate that we
tools, yeah.
Yes, yeah, same tools, same approach, same problem that we're addressing. I wonder whether that idea of Facebook's behind the product experience teams, in knowing that their decisions help to influence and change product development, whether that's a part of the evolution of product analytics.
Yeah, I mean, I think Facebook, and I haven't worked at Facebook, but I do know that really core to the success of their product development efforts, whatever we think about the outcome of those efforts, is that there really is this expectation that product analysts, you know, that they really can stand toe to toe with product managers when we're talking about what is the strategy, what is the problem we're trying to solve, how do we measure our success, what are the touch points, like how can you express this problem in terms of metrics and its solution, and I think holding PAs to really high standards, that it's just this idea that like we're analysts and like wallflowers and all introverts and we're just going to go to our computers and do like, no. I mean, I'm an introvert. It just means I need to be alone to recharge. I think you need to be able to communicate and be in these discussions and talk strategy, and then bring that to your work. And I think Facebook has really been, in this respect, hugely successful in terms of really holding PMs and PAs like kind of to the same standards there.
Along with the masses of different data points that they take from customers. But yeah, we don't need to keep harking on about Facebook. I'm conscious of time and us happily talking away, or at least from my perspective, into the night. But I will start to wrap it up. And typically at this point in the pod, we ask an advice question of our guest, and with you it would be around product analytics, but you seem to have answered it already in going into lots of different advice areas, from education to what product, or the way product analysts need to start thinking. But I'm wondering, is there anything, or what else, what other advice could you give to product analysts that might help them in their career and their work?
I've definitely touched on this already, but I would say really look at the coding, look at the statistics, look at the visualization skills. These are all means to an end. And in the end, what's really going to make you a product analytics Jedi, at some point you master the SQL. Statistics are fundamentally, it's fundamentally more complicated than SQL, but at some point you reach a stage where you've got the toolkit mastered. And this is part of the reason why I think the road to really mastering product analytics, which I haven't done, it really goes not through technical skills. It goes through the so-called the soft skills, which are not soft skills, of course, they're human skills. It goes through communication. It goes through stakeholder management. It's about really being able to understand, not only understand, but then to apply strategy. These are the things that you can just never master in the same way that you could master a coding language. And I would say really excelling in these areas, if you're a lead in organizational strategy as well, helping people grow, really excelling in these areas, that's how you really become successful. I know product analysts who apply topic modeling to understand user behavior and fancy methodologies, latent view allocation. They're working all day in Python, et cetera, et cetera. I know some who work only in SQL. And I think these things reflect the needs of a team. It reflects individual development profiles. It reflects to a certain extent trends. But in the end, like these things, you learn these on the job largely, especially something like SQL. But really, in the end, it's about being effective in these other areas that I mentioned. That's where success really comes, and these are the hardest things to master. So I would say, to get your foot in the door, have that muscle memory of SQL for the interview. Be prepared. Be at least somewhat versed in statistics, especially when it comes to experimentation. But these are the things that really get you in the door. And I think once you've mastered what you need to master technically, what really makes you successful is things like communication, stakeholder management, and strategy. If you're a lead, developing people, organizational strategy. And that journey is never ending.
Okay. So throughout your time as a product analyst, master the stats and master the toolkit, as you said. Perhaps go to your earlier interviews with a foundation of one of those areas, such as SQL, but focus on communication skills, the human skills, let's say, and be sure to be optimizing them at every stage in your career, and even practicing that every day in the work that you do, in the communications that you have with data team managers and product managers. Am I on the right path?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say in an interview, SQL is super important because it's not the most important thing. It's like, can we make sure you can SQL? Because there are things that are so much harder that we so much more of a struggle. Let's just make sure now whether you can SQL. And that's why it comes earlier in the interview process, because actually it's not the most important thing. So yes, this would be
get it out of the way.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Chase, great conversation. We were taking it in lots of directions. Really, thank you very much for your time today. And I should hope that we have another conversation, and I will think about another area of product analytics that I'd really like to know about. And I also ask of any viewers and listeners who are curious about specific areas of product analytics that we perhaps ask Chase about, for them to comment, leave a note, leave us a message, something to that, something in that vein. And that will tee us up nicely for next time. So once again, Thanks very much, Chase, and I shall see you next time.
Thanks so much, Joseph. It was a pleasure. Looking forward.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye now.